the Madman! Welcome to the Mage reveal for Titans. Mage wants to cast a bunch of different spell schools, and we see this through their leader, Sif. 6 mana 4/6, spell damage +1, improved by each spell school you've cast this game. Malygos cost 9 mana and gave spell damage +5. Sif cost 6 mana, and I had to think about how much the spell damage was going to be improved by, and I think you can count on if you're building a committed spell school deck without like overcommitting. I think you can count on casting 5 different spell schools. With spell damage +6, it means when you cast an arcane bolt, you're dealing 9 damage per arcane bolt, which means if you're casting 4 arcane bolts, you're dealing 36 damage. If you were to play Shooting Star with Sif, and let's say you did this earlier, so you had only cast 2 different spell schools, then the Shooting Star would deal 4 damage to a minion and the minions next to it. So Sif has a bit of flexibility in that she can actually help clear the board as well. It doesn't have to be specifically for the OTK. Vexilus was pretty much just used at the end when you were doing the 1-turn kill. Sif, however, a little bit more flexible. Maybe in a more mid-rangey deck. Will often be used as the finisher, but isn't as rigid as Vexilus. Elemental Inspiration is another spell with a payoff when you cast multiple spell schools. 7 mana, summon a 4/5 vortex with a random bonus effect for each spell school you have cast this game. At the point that you cast Elemental Inspiration, I would think that you've cast somewhere along the lines of 4 or 5 spell schools. Supposing you were to say 4, then this card summons 4 4/5 vortexes, which is a total of 16 attack and 20 health worth of stats for 7 mana. Plus, those stats have Divine Shield, Lifesteal, Poisonous, Reborn, Rush, Stealth, Taunt, Wind Fury. A little bit of a mix and match of this. Might be a big enough payoff to encourage you to actually cast 4 or 5 different spell schools and add a few cards that aren't the strongest mage cards possible, but just to cover a few more spell schools. Wisdom of Norganon is another payoff for casting many spell schools. 5 mana, draw 2 cards, cost 1 less for each different spell school you've cast this game, and this is an arcane spell. How much mana do you want to be paying to draw 2 cards? Probably about 2 mana. So with Wisdom of Norganon, you're going to want to have played 3 different spell schools so that you can have your 2 mana draw 2. Ideally, you've played 5 different ones, and then you have your 0 mana draw 2, which is really good. And then you have Inquisitive Creation. We've seen this one before. This was the very first card revealed in Titans, one of the first cards revealed. And it was the 4 mana 3/4 mech with battlecry deal 1 damage to all enemy minions, improved by each spell school you've cast this game. This is actually a really strong payoff card. With as few as 3 different spell schools cast, you're getting a 4 mana 3/4 battlecry deal 4 damage to all enemy minions. Even with just 2 spell schools cast, you're dealing 3 damage to all enemy minions. It's better Duskbreaker. So clearly, you've got the payoffs for casting many different spell schools, and I think all of those cards are viable. Now the question is, can you get to cast 4 or 5 different spell schools? And I think the answer is yes, especially with cards such as Molten Rune. 3 mana, deal 3 damage, get a random spell. Forge, this casts twice. So for 2 mana, forging, and then 3 mana, you're going to be able to deal 6 damage and generate 2 random spells. The random spells may have interesting spell schools. This is also a fire spell, which is actually in a little bit of short supply in Mage, so might just be a reasonable card to run in order to fulfill the fire requirement. Discovery of Magic. 1 mana, discover a spell from a spell school you haven't cast this game. So this is a very flexible card, which you're going to cast near the end of your spell school casting cycle. Then you can get the rarer cards. Fell's probably the most unlikely one to have cast. It does mean if you do cast all the schools of magic, they're a total of 7, by the way, Sif could potentially be spell damage +8. It may seem ridiculous to cast 7 different schools of magic, but Fire, the Frost, and the Arcane, those are essentially for free because you're a mage. For the Shadows spell, there's a very reasonable card for you to put in your deck, Umbral Geist. This is the card that was so good that it was actually included in some decks here and there. You have Watcher of the Sun, which is a strong 2 mana 2/3 battlecry, get a random holy spell. So you've got your holy spell covered from there. So you're only left with
Nature and Foul.
You might have generated those randomly through the Molten Rin, but if you want the wild card, Discovery of Magic will get you those last schools of magic. You might have included cards that are not the best that you would play by default, but the point is you can play some cards that aren't the best in order to make the payoff cards really, really good cards. And then you've got 3 more cards. Unchained Gladiator, 4 mana 4/4 elemental. Battlecry, draw a card, repeat for each elemental you played last turn. Really good card in an elemental deck. Aqua Archivist, 2 mana 2/2 elemental. Battlecry, the next elemental you play costs 2 less. Seems like a no-brainer in an elemental deck. However, on perusal of the elementals out there, noting that Synthesize does exist, and Synthesize would be a really good card in this deck, I don't believe that the payoff provided by Unchained Gladiator, while good, is good enough to justify playing the elemental deck over the Mage Burn deck, the Mage Spell School deck, the Mage Mech deck, the Mage Skeleton deck, but there is potential in the future with more elemental payoffs. Kind of similar to more dragon payoffs in other classes too. And then you got Chill-O-Matic, 2 mana 2/3 magnetic mech card. Freeze any character damaged by this minion. Wow. It's your old beloved Snow Chugger, but with magnetic. And magnetic is a really big deal because when you put this on the shark, those small 1 damage laser missiles, they freeze as well. And if you put this on the Colossal, well then, guys, it's going to completely freeze the board, enemy board, each time any mech attacks. And guy is going to be pretty big. That could be a 10 mana combo. Like, obviously that's really late, but it could happen. I think you could certainly see Chill-O-Matic run over a few of the slightly on the weaker side mechs, which are currently being run in Mech Mage. Next up, we'll have Warlock coming up. Will we see some cool Shadow or Fell spells for Mage to cast?